And I am back with Pro-Life Andrew. And okay, before we were so rudely interrupted, I was talking about how the science is clear that, a fertilized egg is genetically a distinct person, a different person, and genetically it is what it's going to be at the moment of conception until the moment of death. And then biblically, we have these verses like Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations. So here's God saying to Jeremiah, I decided you were going to be a prophet while you were still in your mother's womb. Then we have Luke 1:41. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby leapt in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. Psalm 139:13. For you formed my inward parts and wove me in my mother's womb. So Bible seems pretty clear. So just give me and again, but we've talked about earlier, we talked about how some Adventist theologians developed this theory that a baby is not a real person until they're born and breathe air for the first time. So just give me your elevator pitch. You got 3 minutes in an elevator. Give me your elevator pitch as to why an unborn child is a human being that is a life that God already has a plan for and that God already loves and that is made in God's image and that we should respect and protect.
Yes, there's a really simple, very helpful tip is that very often, both within and outside the Adventist church, when we hear any type of presentation or sermon on the topic of abortion, the two most common verses that we hear appealed to are Psalm 139 and Jeremiah 1:5. Now, it's important to notice so that we are not talking past the other side that people like Gerald Winslow, who was the architect of the church's 1992 position, or as you mentioned, John Stevens and Kevin Paulson, they will point at these verses in Psalm 139 and Jeremiah 1 and say that that is poetic language. It is, Stevens calls it picturesque speech, that it's not really literal. It's not really dealing with or directly identifying the nature of the unborn, which naturally raises the question, are there any texts in the Bible that do so? And it's very helpful for your viewers or anyone involved in this discussion to memorize the scriptures like Genesis 25:22. That is where the two children are wrestling inside the womb. And Moses, when he writes this narrative, when Moses writes Genesis under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, he uses the Hebrew word ben, or plural banim, to define the nature of the unborn. And those are the exact same words used for born children. For example, the word ben and Yamin, son, right hand, is the name Benjamin. It's the son of my right hand. In Ruth, chapter 1:11, in Isaiah 37:3, as you mentioned, Luke chapter 1, verses 41 and 44, the unborn are defined as living human children. That is their concrete physical nature in this world, not some sort of fantasy. It's not poetic language. Elizabeth says the child is jumping in my womb. That's not poetic. She can feel the child jumping around. And I have a video I have been planning on making. Is I would argue that one of the best Bible verses to make this case is Luke 1:36, where it says that should have my Bible with me, that the angel Gabriel is speaking, and he says, you will have a child. Wait, no, I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't know the verbatim, but he's speaking of John the Baptist and says, oh, he's speaking to Mary and says, your cousin Elizabeth, you will conceive, and your cousin Elizabeth has a son, and this is the 6th month with her. So this is the angel Gabriel who stands in the very presence of God, and he, speaking to Mary, defines the unborn as a living human child, as a son, with the exact same word used for born children. And he gives a time period. He says she has had this son for 6 months, and he would be born 3 months later. So he gives the whole time period, the gestation. He has been a son for the last 6 months, not when he's born, not 5 minutes before, not when you can feel him at the previous term of quickening. No, he's been a son long before you even knew he was there, when he was first conceived. So the Bible's, the topic of abortion and infanticide is not a topic that needs great explanation anywhere in the biblical narrative, other than explicit condemnation of anyone or any group that would want to hurt a child, whether it be born or unborn. And so that's the summary elevator view.
Okay, well, that's good. If you go back to the beginning of abortion, you go back to Margaret Sanger and what became Planned Parenthood, and Margaret Sanger was into eugenics, meaning into selective breeding to improve the race. And a lot of it was, we don't want people that are imbeciles, we don't want the retarded, we don't want the defective, we want to weed these people out of the human gene pool. That was eugenics. And actually, it peaked around 1920 and went on to the 20s and 30s. And actually, in his post-Adventist career, John Harvey Kellogg was into eugenics. I've done an article on that.
Yeah.
But and not a small part of this was very overt, frank racism of, we don't want the black people breeding. And ever since the Margaret Sanger days, there's been a racial edge to it, in that black mothers abort at something like 3 times the rate of white expecting mothers. And you look into the inner cities, and the majority of the abortions that happen in the big cities of America are aborting black babies.
Yes, that's right.
But despite this, the black Seventh-day Adventists are the biggest proponents, or maybe because of it, I don't know. But I mean, they're the black Seventh-day Adventists are the biggest pro-abortion section of our church, it would seem to me. What do you make of that?
Well, one is that I think that is generally true. I wish that somehow we could do a very comprehensive, very accurate cross-sectional study of the Adventist mind on abortion, separated by age, demographic, level of education. And you would no doubt find some pro-abortion sentiments in all demographics. But I think that proportionally, you would find much higher among black Seventh-day Adventists than you would other demographics, whether they be Asian, Hispanic, or white. And I think it would differ on region and, of course, educational background. You're far more likely, as I mentioned in the previous video, when Roe versus Wade was overturned, the first group to come out and talk about how sad it was and to lament that Roe versus Wade was overturned were all these black leaders in the Seventh-day Adventist community. And I was thankful in kind of a sad way that during the discussion, the theological discussion to defend abortion, they were all black leaders. There were no whites or Hispanics or Asians involved. And I think it really helps open people's eyes and realize this is a huge problem within this demographic. Now, as an American citizen, aside from being an Adventist, this would be concerning by itself. But the fact that I'm an Adventist and black Americans make up at least, depending on what survey you look at, 25% to over 1/3 of Adventist membership in the USA, that's a huge problem because of the prophetic implications. If you believe that nobody has the right to life, but at some point in the future, you're going to be given the death decree and you're going to be able to stand against that, where are you going to get the courage to stand up for the 4th commandment later if you can't tell the truth now about the 6th commandment? a lot of people, I've been doing a lot of interviews over the last several months, several years with Black Adventists, and I have a video coming up with some findings from those interviews. But one of the consistent points made repeatedly who I talk to is that many Black Adventists, out of their own mouth, say, Andrew, people just don't want to say anything because if we speak out for the sixth commandment now, we're going to be ostracized or looked bad or looked down upon by the rest of Black Americans. It's a huge peer pressure issue within that community, out of their own mouth, and I'll go into detail on that later. Incidentally, that you bring that up, there's an article that was published in September 2020, so this was before the election, it was a Gallup poll on Black Adventists or Black Americans and abortion, and I'll send you the link, or anyone can Google this. It says Black Americans have become more likely to support abortion rights over the past decade. This marks a significant change from the situation 15 to 20 years ago for Black Americans. And it shows a percentage here. It says that during the first part of 2001 to 2007, when interviewed, 31% of Black Americans would say that abortion was morally acceptable. Fast forward 10 years, from 2017 to 2020, that number has gone from 31 to 46%. So you see a 15% percentage gain in about 12 to 15 years. So there's a huge gain of support for abortion in the Black American community. And this should be concerning for our church, because typically where American culture goes, or where any subdivision of that, where any Black American culture goes, Black Adventists will follow, unless you have some strong, masculine, godly voices telling the truth and saying, we can't go with the culture that in that direction. And unfortunately, this is just an observable fact. You will not find any, to my knowledge, voices within the Adventist Church in the Black American community speaking out against this, or in any, there's just no moral clarity. There's no one speaking against it. And those that do lament it. I mean, there was an article that came out, I think it was the Seattle Times. There was a pastor at the Maranatha Adventist Church there in Seattle, Washington. He was interviewed, no, it was a local radio station. And he told the news, he said, this is a sad day. This is a terrible day that Roe versus Wade is overturned. Now, this is bizarre. It's wild. It's I don't know how to explain it. The very means that have been used.
I listened to that interview. That was on NPR, and I that was one of the liberal websites had a link to that, and I listened to that interview, and I'm thinking, that's sad when you have a Seventh-day Adventist go on NPR and say overruling Roe is a sad day. I mean, that's a sad day.
Well, the estimates, Kanye West made quite an issue about this, and he, of course, because he has so many followers, this got into the news. He said, since Roe versus Wade, an estimated 22 million Black children have been violently killed. And, the idea that you would oppose slavery because slavery was bad, but turn around and defend the most extreme, most effective way of exterminating your own race, is so
partial
bizarre
genocide.
And wild.
Yeah, it's a partial genocide.
You're defending the genocide of your own people.
Yeah, it's crazy, and they have a lot of challenges in the Black community around the issue of sexuality, and something like 70% of Black children are born out of wedlock. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. And the numbers are just insane, and it's going up. The numbers are higher among whites now than they were among Blacks. If you go back 100 years, the illegitimacy rate among whites is about double what it was among Blacks 100 years ago. It's like 25 or 30% among whites, but it's like 70% among Blacks. So this is it's dysfunction on such a mass scale, and we gotta bring back male-headed households, and it's across the board. It's for everyone. It's for We got to bring back patriarchy. We got to bring back male-headed households. We got to do away with no-fault divorce. We got to do away with. We got to change this whole culture. But the place where it's most concentrated now is in the Black community, and so you're looking at a subculture of matriarchy and illegitimacy, and it's I mean, I guess to them they probably, I mean, maybe they're not, maybe they're looking at abortion as being the least of their worries, but it's definitely a problem.
Well, one note, I think that to their credit, Black Adventists, to my knowledge, are not responsible in any way for bringing abortion into the church, as far as I know. I know the elder, what was his name? The North American president who was Black. I know he played some degree of covering up the 1971 guidelines, but you don't really see any Black Adventist leadership trying to defend abortion until about the 1990s, to my knowledge, and onwards. They didn't really develop those ideas. All these ideas mostly came out of geographically from the Loma Linda area, the Pacific Union with John Stevens and Loma Linda. And then you see Black Adventist leadership begin to repeat this decades later. And so,
well,
yeah,
honestly, people hate it when you mention Democrat Republican stuff, but I mean, the reality is Blacks vote tribally Democrat. It's historically 90% or more. And the Democrats have been radicalized on the issue of abortion. I mean, if you go back just to Bill Clinton in the 90s, Bill Clinton would say things like, well, abortion should be
safe, legal, rare.
Yeah, safe, legal, and rare. It should be safe, it should be legal, but it should be rare. And that was the Democrats' mantra in Bill Clinton's days, as recently as the 1990s. Today, you don't hear them say that. They don't think it should be rare. They're pro-abortion in all circumstances. I mean, they're just, abortion has gone from being something that they've gone from being pro-choice to abortion is practically a sacrament of their secular religion. And that's today's Democratic Party. And I think if you're looking for why the Black community is becoming more, radicalized on that, it's because the Democratic Party has become more radicalized. I mean, that's just, I know people hate when you bring in Democrats and Republicans, but the reality is the Democratic Party has gone radical pro-abortion to the point of infanticide, where you have the governor of Virginia saying, you delivered the child and then you put the child on a towel and you sit down and have a conversation with the mother about whether she wants to keep it. I mean, that was the governor, that was Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia, I think. So I mean, in these radical Democrat-controlled states like New York, you're going to have abortion right up to the moment of birth and beyond. So it's just, but anyway,
two points. Number one, you almost quoted verbatim from the study, and I already have it highlighted. It said, this is from the Gallup poll. It says, party identification is a core demographic variable of interest in today's environment, since over 3/4 of Black Americans identify with or lean toward the Democratic Party. Any broad trends that differentially affect Democrats' attitudes about abortion are going to affect Black Americans as well. Democrats' abortion attitudes have shifted significantly over the past decade. And then they go on to explain that since Blacks overall in America, not just Adventism, but overall tend to identify with Democrat Party values, and since the Democratic Party values have become more extreme, Black attitudes have just followed right along, which is a problem from a cultural perspective as Americans, but an even bigger problem within the church. And a very helpful tip is, and I've learned this having many conversations and interviews, if you are talking with a Black Adventist in our church on the topic of abortion, Before, my recommendation is you don't need to. There's no real positive value in using the word Democratic or Republican. It just causes, it just breaks down the conversation needlessly when you can just stay on the Bible and make gains that way. But a very good point to bring up is Edward Allred. That has nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans. In fact, he's Republican. He has supported all these Republicans, and yet his identification with a very racially centered, racially targeted abortion genocide, I mean, openly promoting it
Yeah.
in minority communities.
Well, and he was quoted saying some incredibly racist
Yes.
things.
But nobody in the Black Adventist leadership will oppose that. They'll never speak against that. And that's a clue, because that has nothing to do with politics, and they still won't say anything. And that's really sad, because we need everybody on board to stand up for the Sixth Commandment, regardless of the level of melanin in your skin. We need to provide a faithful witness.
Yeah, one of the things I wanted to get to in this interview was this has become, a lot of Adventists view this as, oh, this is a Roman Catholic issue. The Roman Catholics care about this. We don't. And you look at the overruling of Roe v. Wade was because they got some really strong Catholic believers, like Amy Coney Barrett, who's a very strong charismatic Catholic, and then you had Kavanaugh, who's a Catholic, and many of the others. And so you've got all these Catholics on the Supreme Court, and they overruled Roe versus Wade. So this is really just a Catholic issue. But on your latest video that you produced, you brought up a really interesting point, which is that when Roe was passed, when Roe was not passed like a law, it was decided by the justices. It upset it negated or overruled the laws in almost all the states. Almost all 50 of the states had some legislation that was nullified by Roe versus Wade. But who passed these laws? It wasn't Catholics. Yes. It was Protestants. If you go back to 1955, this was a 75% Protestant country. If you go back to 1875, this was about an 85-90% Protestant country. Catholics didn't pass any of these anti-abortion laws. These were passed by Protestants. Protestants did this, and there was one guy that you talked about,
Horatio Storer.
Horatio Storer, yeah, and the Physicians Crusade, and Horatio Storer, and this went on in, I believe, the 1870s and 80s, and they were the ones that were, and this was when abortion was just becoming more technically available, doable, and available, and that's when the Physicians Crusade. So talk about that for a while.
So there were two interesting phenomena that take place in the 19th century. Number one was the scientific advances in science that allowed for the discovery that life begins at conception. And the second one was, the scientific advances also allowed for the development of scientific medical technologies that made surgery safer. I mean, at the time, nobody wore gloves. There was no anesthetic. There was no antiseptics. There was no analgesics. There was no antibiotics. Surgery was incredibly dangerous, especially if you thought you could go into a woman's uterus and for the purposes of abortion or for any reason. Surgery was very, very dangerous. And so this advances in medical technology made it easier or safer for abortionists to ply their trade, because they wouldn't kill so many people. I mean, there was quotes in the big book by law historian Joseph de la Pena. He provides many quotes that if you tried to perform an abortion in 1820 or 1830, that was tantamount to suicide. Because how are you going to survive that? It's so dangerous. And so the American Medical Association, it began in the year 1857. They began what became known as the Physicians Crusade Against Abortion. And the leader of that was a doctor named Horatio Storer. And he was not just the leader in this crusade to make abortion illegal in statutory law. It had already been illegal in common law. but he was a pioneer in the whole field of gynecological obstetrics science. He wasn't just abortion. He was interested in the whole field. But he directed this Physicians' Crusade against abortion starting in 1857, and they were so successful that by 1900, every state in the Union made out abortion illegal. And that's critical because at the time, the United States was severely divided on the issue of slavery, but they were all united on the topic of abortion. If you go back and look up the research by, what was his name? It'll come to me in a minute. He has that paper online, Abortion Attitudes and Statutes in the 19th Century. He's got a weird last name. Anyways, he goes through and labels and enumerates or has a list of all the voting records that all the legislators and all the senators and everyone, when they voted, it was all 77-0, 68-0, 14-0, 100-1, or 89-0. I mean, there was just overwhelming unanimous support to make abortion illegal. And even feminists, this is a point they never want to talk about, the pro-abortion side. The feminists of the 19th century, Susan B. Anthony, Stanton, all these people openly supported making abortion illegal and said it was a horrible crime and it was used to abuse women, which it is used today, especially rapists and pedophiles. They love abortion. So when the 14th Amendment was passed, I think it was, what was the year, 1868? Only 8 to 9% of the population were Catholic. And because of this very strong anti-Catholic sentiments at the time, there were areas Catholics weren't even allowed to hold public office. And the Catholic Church was largely silent on that issue until many decades later. So the idea that this is a purely Catholic issue is absolute nonsense. And that's important because when Roe was overturned just a few weeks ago, they are affirming or reinstating legislation and a mindset that was put in place by Protestants. So this was not a Catholic decision, or actually it's ironic that Catholics are affirming what Protestants already had in place. And that is so important, so significant, and yet that never gets talked about. You know, in 1867, the most well-known person to speak about against abortion was a Congregationalist minister named John Todd. And he published an article in a well-known journal, I think it was called the Boston Recorder, in early 1867. Well, just a few months later in June, Uriah Smith, the editor of the Advent Review and Herald, he takes John Todd's article, Fashionable Murder, and publishes it in our journal. And in that article, Todd is praising the work of Horatio Storer and the American Medical Association. You know, to appreciate that, that would be the equivalent of the Adventist Review today publishing an anti-abortion article by, say, James Dobson or Franklin Graham or Jerry Falwell. If you did that today, people's heads would explode. But back then, that was so normal. There was no division or disunity or problem with Adventists sharing or publishing non-Adventist ideas on abortion because everyone agreed it's wrong to kill children, the unborn are children. And there was no concept at all about liberty or freedom or women have the freedom to murder their own children, or that the government cannot legislate the Sixth Commandment. That was foreign to every segment in society except the abortionists.
Right.
And to kind of underscore that point, literally, this is what is today, July, whatever today is. Literally, just a few hours ago, someone sent me a video of Walter Weiss, just one of many. He published his comments in response to Roe versus Wade, and he does the exact same thing as everyone else. He frames it as a Catholic issue, that this will create a bond with Catholicism, and that, you know, everything is swinging in their favor. And I mean, this is just, it's absurdity. It's total absurdity. And what's sad about in our church is that, and you probably have some good thoughts on this.
Well, of course, it's not even all Catholics that oppose abortion. It's conservative Catholics.
Yeah.
Liberal Catholics are people like Nancy Pelosi, you know, who's a Democrat, yes. And people like Joe Biden, who is a liberal Catholic. So I mean, you know,
Sotomayor, everyone.
And by the way, I mean the abortion in Joe Biden is its own sad story, because basically, when he was younger, he was anti-abortion, and now that he's lost his
Yeah.
mind, now that he has no mental capacity, he's rabidly pro-abortion. But yeah, no, it's not. And so it's not all Catholics. It's conservative Catholics, the liberal Catholics, and you had a bishop in San Francisco who said he wasn't going to give uh, Nancy Pelosi communion anymore because she was so
Yeah.
out of line on the question of abortion. So, but yeah, it was. I mean, there wasn't. People's memory is short. I mean, we're down to about 45% Protestants in America now. But I mean, again, middle of the 20th century, 75% Catholics didn't pass anything. Everything that was passed by Protestants because they were 75% of the population. I mean, a lot of, the whole sexual revolution, including abortion and everything else, what's behind that is the collapse of Protestantism. And
Yes.
it's the collapse, it's Protestantism becoming liberal, and liberal is nothing. Liberalism is not a leavening factor or force in society. It's just not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, and as a result of, we're seeing the collapse of the republic now. I mean, we saw the collapse of, the liberals started to take over Protestantism 100 years ago, and then 50 years ago, we had the sexual revolution, which included abortion and no fault divorce and all the other stuff that was connected, feminism,
Yeah.
all the other stuff connected with the sexual revolution. I thought it was interesting that you made a study of that. And that's, again, why there was a sexual revolution in America, liberal Protestantism, the collapse of Protestantism. And now it's the collapse of the republic. I mean, I think America is just, we're all pretending like this is still a free country and there's still democracy and all that. And boy, it's gone. It's just gone. But well, anyway, it's been a tremendous interview. I have really,
Yes, thank you.
It has, so I guess my question is, what do you, I mean, now that I guess you keep going, because now that Roe v. Wade is overruled, that means abortion is a live political issue to be decided state by state in every state in the union. And so it's more important than ever to get the pro-life arguments out there, because again, we're not being ruled by the 9 judges. We have the opportunity to go to our state legislatures and tell them the kind of laws that we want. So I mean, people think, oh, the fact that Roe has been and Roe and Casey have been thrown out means that it's not an issue anymore. No, just the opposite. Now it really is an issue, because we've been given back our Republican form of government, our elected representatives who write laws, and we govern ourselves through our elected representatives. And now we can govern ourselves on the topic of abortion through our elected representatives. So this is, I mean, and I think, all the same needs are there, the same needs for counseling, the same needs for, helping unwed mothers, the same need of, extending grace to women who've had abortions and are feeling guilty. You need to know that God is a God that forgives, that Jesus is a Savior that forgives our sins. And, all that is just more important now than it's ever been. So I guess my question is, what do you plan to do going forward?
Well, I have some kind of bad news, and I saw this coming. To appreciate why this is happening, let's go back maybe a year or so, and something which I think you've written about there at Fulcrum, is that during the situation of the pandemic, they created this whole I forget the word, level of censorship, that you're not allowed to say certain things because of, quote, posting medical misinformation. Well, as soon as Roe is getting overturned, I immediately thought to myself, because big tech has so much power and they're so aligned with academia and Hollywood and the government, they're going to use that same template and apply the medical misinformation to abortion as well. I mean, that's the first thought that came to my mind. And literally, like an hour before I had this interview with you, someone sent me this article. This was just in the news like a few hours ago. So published by CNBC and many other outlets. YouTube says it will crack down on abortion misinformation and remove videos with false claims. So
of course, they're not talking about misinformation. They're talking about true information that they don't like. And they're not talking about false claims. They're talking about true claims that doesn't match the liberal narrative. I mean, we're going to have to do something with big tech, and it's going to be ugly, but it's got to happen. Yeah, so I do foresee this censorship beginning, and of course, probably intensifying. Of course, I don't know how much longer my YouTube channel will last. I'm going to have to get on other platforms. I have slow internet, and I've been pretty lazy about doing that, so I'm going to have to do that ASAP. In the long term, my personal long-term goals, if I had my druthers, if I could be anywhere in the world, I wish I could be. My wife and I, we want to be in Tibet or Afghanistan or Iran or Algeria or Bhutan or some unreached area of the world doing missions. That's my desire. That's what I really like. I never thought in my wildest imagination that I would be living in the Philippines making videos about abortion, but here we are. And I am thankful that, praise the Lord, all the past 5 years, 6 years of work is now becoming very important and very relevant. We'll see for how long that material can stay up there. So I will continue to follow this and publish responses and more information. But at the same time, it's kind of difficult. You know, where I live, I'm one of the only foreigners here, and I have lots of opportunities here to do ministry. I'm always meeting people who want to share with me or invite me to their homes and stuff, because I'm always trying to reach out in my neighborhood. And I really want to increase my proficiency in the language, which is Bisaya, where I live. And so it's really hard. Every day I'm always in the Philippines. There are 7,000 islands, and the national language is Tagalog. But in each region, they have their own language. And one of the biggest languages here is called Bisaya. Wow. And so I know a little bit. Yeah, I know if there's Filipinos in your church, they all know what there's probably some Bisaya there, because there's the largest region, the region with the largest number of Adventists is actually in the south in the Bisaya region. So I want to learn the language more, but at the same time, I'm spending so much time on abortion. So I hope that I can make some less videos and spend more time with language. But every day I wake up and see this stuff. It's hard to stop. So I'll continue, and we'll see where it goes. But I do believe that my personal suspicion is that it will probably get worse before it gets better, because we're seeing a lot of parallels with the Civil War, especially before the Civil War. You know, it just got worse and worse, and Adventists at the beginning of the Civil War thought it's not going to be long. You know, it'll be over soon. But that war dragged out for several years until finally the Adventists were called to be enlisted, and now you can't purchase your freedom anymore. And that drove the Adventist church to its knees. And once it was driven to its knees, began to pray. That's when God intervened in March, April of 1865. So I see this issue as morally of a much greater magnitude, much worse than slavery. And if we learn anything from the past, and because of the United States' role in prophecy and being a nation of light, it seems pretty certain that God is going to intervene somehow, although I'm not sure how, and I don't know if it's going to be pleasant. Well, I guess we're going to have to leave it there, Andrew, but I appreciate your time. You've been very generous, and it's been very enlightening and very educational. So thank you very much.
God bless you and your audience.
God bless you too. Thanks very much. Pro-Life Andrew, ladies and gentlemen. Check out his channel on YouTube, and the videos he's produced. They're all excellent. They're all high production quality, and they're all full of interesting information.